All right, let's get into the introduction to the study. Given the epidemic of obesity and increasing prevalence of type 2 diabetes, an important question is whether weight loss should be emphasized as part of a treatment regimen for individuals with these conditions. Findings from the Action for Health and Diabetes, called the Look Ahead trial, which observed no significant effects of a lifestyle weight loss intervention on cardiovascular disease, mortality, or morbidity in such individuals, raises questions regarding how strongly healthcare professionals should encourage adults with type 2 diabetes to lose weight. In addition, as Look Ahead follow-up continued over time, the outcomes of interest gradually became those of greater relevance to those in older populations with diabetes, things like geriatric syndromes, cognition, and disability. So the goal of this paper is to discuss the history of the Look Ahead study, the areas in which intensive lifestyle intervention did and did not improve outcomes, and issues related to whether this intervention is beneficial to some but harmful to others. By reviewing these findings, we will look to answer the question of whether weight loss needs to be encouraged in this population. So the original impetus for the Look Ahead study came from observational studies that showed weight loss in older adults might have adverse effects on all-cause mortality. Observational studies that try to distinguish intentional from unintentional weight loss in older adults has led to the hypothesis that the negative effects of weight loss resulted from unintentional weight loss, usually associated with things like chronic illness, whereas voluntary weight loss tended to have positive effects. So people that have cancer and go through treatment for that, there is a weight loss associated, but it's a negative weight loss. Whereas they're saying if you're proactive about wanting to lose weight, that's what's going to incur the positive effect. A randomized trial was suggested as the best way to distinguish voluntary versus involuntary weight loss. The decision to address this question within individuals with diabetes was based on the growing prevalence of this population and on their elevating risk of developing cardiovascular disease. Now, you guys know, because I've repeated it ad nauseum in all of these Jimmy Makes Science Simple videos, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, even cancer, obesity, they're all in the same spectrum of the exact same disease. It's the disease of insulin resistance. If you haven't figured that out by now, and you can't see in these studies how clearly tied all of these things are, Alzheimer's disease is also a part of that, PCOS, we could go down the list of all the manifestations of insulin resistance. And that's what it is. I wish they would actually get to the heart of that rather than teasing out type 2 diabetes and, there's an association with the type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular risk. No, it's the same disease. Let's stop dancing around that. So the Look Ahead study ran from 2002 to 2012. It was funded as a 2-armed randomized controlled trial comparing the intervention group with a control group given diabetes support and education. The primary outcome was a composite which included death from cardiovascular causes, non-fatal myocardial infarction, that's a heart attack, non-fatal stroke, and hospitalized angina, which is chest pain. The goal of the intervention was to produce a 7% weight loss through calorie restriction. So this is the intensive intervention they did. Calorie restriction along with increased physical activity. Eat less, move more? Is that what Look Ahead is looking at? You bet it is. Which is going to make the findings we have here in a minute all the more laughable. That this is what they promote heavily to the population. And watch what happens when they did this. They wanted to produce significantly greater improvements in cardiovascular fitness than that in the control group. The study successfully achieved these goals. Did they? We'll find out in a minute. In 2012, the intervention phase of Look Ahead was stopped for futility because it's so funny when they say, we reached our goals, but watch this. Because there was no differences between the two groups when it came to primary and secondary outcomes for heart disease, cardiovascular disease. At that point, the trial was converted into a post-intervention observational phase. In other words, All the data up to that point just came to a screeching halt. It was no longer a randomized controlled trial. They're like, we're not showing any difference between the control group and the intervention group, where we were making the hypothesis that this intervention of losing weight by eating less and moving more was going to provide benefit, and they got a whole lot of nothing when it came to the primary outcome when it related to their cardiovascular disease. Is that not funny? Like, if the whole point of the study was to show that calorie restriction and exercising more was supposed to provide a benefit to weight loss, which by extension of that would benefit the cardiovascular disease, and they did not see any difference between that group and the control group, they had egg on their face, guys. And now they want to brag about how it was so successful. No, it was not. It was an abysmal failure. And yet it's heralded, the Look Ahead study, heralded as proof that we need to be getting people to eat less and move more in order to improve their cardiovascular health. You know better now. Although the intervention phase was still ongoing, 2 ancillary studies were separately funded that added performance-based measures of function. One of them was the National Institutes of Aging, doing a memory and movement study, and then the Look Ahead brain MRI study. The first one was 2009 to 2012, and then the brain MRI one was 2011 to 2014. These studies provided objective measures of physical function and cognition in over 1,000 participants. They did MRIs on 319 people. The post-intervention observational phase of Look Ahead has focused increasingly on issues of greatest relevance to aging population with overweight, obesity, and type 2 diabetes. That was not their original intention. They wanted to see people of all ages with overweight and obesity with type 2 diabetes. But they found, we can't really find anything in the general population, younger population, so let's focus on the old geezers that we know have some health outcomes happening to them because they're at that point in their life. Let me skip down a little bit because I want to get into the methods of the study. So, the participants in the study were recruited at 16 clinical sites within the United States. Major eligibility criteria included they had to be between the ages of 45 to 76. They needed to have a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. Their BMI needed to be greater than 25 and greater than 27 if they were on taking insulin. They needed to be able to complete a maximal exercise test and have a primary care provider. Okay? A total of 5,145 participants entered the trial. 59% of them were women, 37% from racial ethnic minority groups. Of the original 5,145 enrollees, 638 of them died during the study. 590 were no longer being followed by the end of the study. The cohort continues to have similar gender and racial ethnic distribution to the original. So they had fall off because of death and people basically dropping out, but the percentages as it relates to the breakdown of men and women and ethnicity stayed basically the same. All right, so what were the interventions? Participants were randomly assigned to either this low-calorie and exercise program as the intervention or the control group. The goal of the intervention was to produce and maintain a mean 7% weight loss. Here's how they did it. By reducing calorie intake. They wanted to get a goal of 1,200 to 1,800 calories a day, which I've heard some much more extreme, especially in studies, low-calorie diets. So this one's not horrible at face value, although I think 1,200 is on the low end. 1,800, and again, depending on the men or women, I'm assuming the 1,800 was more men and the 1,200 was more women, and that there was a mix in between. I don't think women per se need to go too much below 1,500 calories. Again, depending on age, depending on a lot of things. And then guys, 1,800 is pretty darn low for calories. Along with increasing their physical activity with a goal of 175 minutes a week of moderate intensity activity. So what is that? Almost 3 hours worth of exercise. It's not a lot. To achieve these changes, the intervention included both group and individual sessions, with weekly sessions during months 1 through 6, and then they gradually decreased the contact. Contact remained at least monthly throughout. The intervention participants received 3 sessions a year, all focused on diet, exercise, and social support. All right, so the assessments. In-clinic assessments were held annually through the intervention phase of the study, but later were conducted every other year. In addition, participants were contacted by phone every 6 months throughout the entire study to assess their health outcomes. All assessments were conducted by certified staff who were masked to intervention assignment. In other words, they were blinded. They didn't know which one, whether they were in the control group or the intervention group. They just took the assessment of what was going on in their health. So what were the results? The effects of the intervention on its direct targets, weight, and cardiovascular fitness. Remember, that was the primary outcome originally in the study. As noted here, the goal of the study was to produce a mean 7% weight loss through a combination of calorie reduction and increased physical activity, and significantly greater improvements in cardiovascular fitness than those in the control group. The study successfully achieved these goals. They may have successfully achieved the 7% reduction in weight, but let's not pretend that they reached their goal of better cardiovascular results than the control group when they were exactly the same. It kills me how they have to, but we achieved the goal. No, you didn't. Moreover, significant differences between arms for these intervention goals have been maintained over time. The weight losses through the intervention phase and the 2 years following the end of the intervention, the greatest weight loss occurred during the first year of the trial, which makes sense. You're going to lose the most weight when you first start. The intervention group achieved a mean weight loss of 8.5% at year 1. Remember, their goal was 7%. Relative to a weight loss of 0.6% in the control group. So listen. The control group barely lost any weight at all, 0.6% compared with 8.5% during that same 1 year period for the intervention group. So they accomplished major weight loss to the tune of probably, 12 to 15 times the amount of weight loss of the control group. Although participants in the intervention group gradually regained weight, anybody ask why? No. The differences in weight change for both groups remain statistically significant throughout the trial, which I think is wonderful in light of what happened with their cardiovascular risk. So it was still big enough that the weight loss, if that's what they were trying to prove, is if we get people to lose weight, it's going to improve their cardiovascular markers. That's what they were hoping would happen. For example, at year 8, the intervention group had lost a cumulative 4.7% of their initial weight, compared with just 2.1% on the control group. So when the intervention stopped in 2012, there was concern that the intervention participants would experience a weight gain after getting out of the study. Although they did regain more than the control group during the 2 years after the intervention ended, both groups experienced significant subsequent declines in weight during that post-intervention period. The intervention group had continued to have a greater percent weight loss from baseline relative to the control group, and these findings were unexpected because typically participants in a lifestyle intervention gradually regain weight over time and then go back to their baseline level. The continued weight loss in both groups raises questions regarding whether the weight losses occurred later in the trial in both arms are unintentional or perhaps related to illness. How do you tease that out? The only way you could is if you looked individually at each of the participants to see, all right, what were they going through that led to the weight loss? Was it because of an illness that was making them lose weight, or were they actually trying to lose weight through some kind of lifestyle change?